Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Seth Foreman. I'm the CEO at Socialsuite, and I'll be your host. If you're facing your first year of AASB sustainability regulations and want a clear, efficient path to compliance without over-engineering, you're in the right place. In the next 30 minutes, we're going to be breaking down exactly what a minimum viable AASB approach looks like, particularly for Group 2 companies, what's required, what auditors will look for, and how to meet the standard confidently and cost effectively. Now, we do have a couple housekeeping items as it relates to the webinar. The content today will last just about 30 minutes, and then we're going to run a Q&A session. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a chat area. Feel free to write any questions or comments in that section, and our experts will either answer it in real time or we'll get to it during the Q&A part of the webinar. We are recording today's webinar, and we will distribute it to all attendees soon after. And we do have the deck that will be available to download as well after the webinar itself. Now, for those not familiar with Socialsuite, we are an AI-driven sustainability impact and risk management platform. We help companies to identify, manage, and monitor their ESG-driven risks and impacts through both technology and AI. We work with hundreds of different types of public and private companies all over the world, and we are backed by Salesforce Ventures and Tidal Ventures and many other investors. Now, as a reminder, we do monthly webinars. We put out all different types of content around sustainability and thought leadership. Please go onto our website into the resources area where you can find all of our content that you can view it at any time. Okay, so moving into the last part here to introduce our speakers. Today we're going to have, of course, Dr. Tim, Socialsuite's Chief Impact Officer, and then we have our special guest, and personally really excited to have on today, who's one of the foremost experts around climate and climate-based reporting, Thierry Lotrian, who's a CEO and founder of Climate and Decisions. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, I'm going to leave the stage, and I will be back on to run the Q&A later. I'm going to pass the baton over to Tim and Thierry to take things from here. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Thanks, Seth, for that introduction. And Thierry, welcome. Great to have you here today. What we're going to do is we're going to unpack today a minimum viable path to the Australian Sustainability Reporting Standards, AASB S2. Now, first, we're going to really briefly look at the ASRS. What is it and why does it matter to you? We're not going to go into a lot of detail because there's a lot of information already out there. A lot of people already know where they sit and what it means. They just want to know how to do this in a really efficient manner. That's what we'll focus on today. And we'll end with a couple of key decisions and actions you can take right now to get yourself in a really good position. So to get started quick, what is the ASRS? It's Australia Sustainability Disclosure Standards. We have two standards in Australia. One is a general sustainability disclosure standard, which is voluntary, and the other one is climate-related financial disclosures, AASB S2. So we'll call that S2 today. Now, who needs to report on that? There are very good workflows and tables where you can see exactly if your company is in or out. But largely speaking, to simplify, Group 1, the larger entities, they need to report over this current year, 2025. The first reports will come out next year. And entities after that, there's a Group 2 and a Group 3 with smaller entity, different thresholds. They'll be starting to report over the next 1 to 2 or 3 years. So what that means is that a lot of companies now are either already collating data if they're in Group 1 or Group 2, getting really ready around what do we need to do next year? How do we put ourselves in the best position to do this in a compliant manner? Keep in mind that all the work you do around this needs to be assured as well. That's quite important to realize. And in doing this, why it really matters is that we see globally, climate is really at the forefront of everyone. Regulators, but also we see investors really care about this type of information. It's really important. And for Australia here, we see it's now really the start of mandatory ESG reporting. It's likely that in time we'll get more additional reporting requirements. We already have that voluntary S1 requirement, more is likely to follow. So climate first, that's where we're starting. So that's what we're focusing on today. That S2 standard, what is the minimum you need to do? And that's really our starting point for today. Now, what that means is that a lot of companies, maybe the larger entities or otherwise companies might say, well, let's take this reporting and take a strategic approach. How can this reporting actually drive business transformation, business value? How do we take all this and integrate it deeply into our strategy, be really proactive and forward-looking? Now, we're not taking that stance today. What we're doing is the opposite, is we're saying, what is the minimum you might need to do to be compliant, to have defensible information that can be assured, minimize your cost, your scope, your timeline, but make sure that you meet those regulatory requirements. So we call that a minimum viable part to S2 compliance. That's what we want to unpack. Now, why would companies want to go for that rather than being strategic and thinking long-term? There's a number of reasons there, but maybe Thierry, more kind of, from what you've seen in the market there, like how are companies thinking at the moment, and where do you see this kind of, let's call it the minimum viable part? Like I said, where do you see that coming to play? What type of companies, entities are thinking about, let's do the minimum required, and why is that generally?
Yeah, I can see a lot of Australian organizations really focused on delivering the bare minimum. Perhaps let's define what it is, Tim, to start with. I think when we talk about the minimum viable path, is very much about compliance reporting, right? So what the law requires under AASB S2 around governance, around climate risk identification, scenario analysis, and scope 1 and 2 emissions and metrics and targets. So that's what is required in year one. Now, there are also some harder topics under the regulation. I think immediately about scope 3, about gathering data is really a huge pain point. So although it's not mandatory in year one, it should be a consideration to start now, even just because it's hard. And then let's compare that to what is not just compliance. So what I think, Tim, you called strategic reporting, right? Where companies really use climate as a business value driver. Think about capital allocation, product strategy, competitive positioning. So that is not the minimum viable path. So the minimum viable path is probably an opportunity to build a foundation in year one, get to an audit-ready position, and then build on that into a more strategic position in the future.
Excellent, yeah. And what I see from experience is that it's often companies that have not dipped their toe yet into anything climate. They haven't really given it much consideration. It hasn't been a priority for a variety of reasons. So they haven't done anything like TCFD reporting or otherwise that is really at the starting of that climate journey and say, what's the minimum I need to do just to get my head around it and be compliant? So let's unpack that. You already kind of flagged those key components there. A lot of this, that S2, the key disclosures around governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, targets, scenario analysis, a lot of that comes out of what people might have heard of and might have done, but likely also not, is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So a climate reporting framework that's been around for quite a while. A lot of companies globally have already been voluntarily reporting on that. That has now been formalized globally by the AASB as IFRS S2, and what we see jurisdictions are implementing that in their own version, but often staying really close to that original. So in Australia, that is the AASB S2. So it's very similar. It's something that some companies already have done, but if you haven't yet, then you need to start from scratch and work your way through those areas. But it's always important to know that if you've already done work on TCFD, there's probably a lot you have already done. So then start with a gap analysis. But today we're going to assume that you haven't started that climate journey yet and really look at the minimum components. So what does that look like? First of all, a couple of principles, and I think you already touched upon that, Thierry, is like needs to be proportional to your size, risk, capability, and really look at what is required in year one. There might be other things you need to do in year 2 and year 3, but now just really kind of keep it really fit and minimum to what the minimum requirements are. And in that journey, then really consider that for assurance purposes, just document everything. That makes assurance so much easier. But also for next year, if you document your process, your rationale, your decisions, then next year, doing the next version of it is a lot easier. So you're building a foundation today, not a final state, and you're going to mature over time there. But the key components we're going to look at today is governance, assigning that and the oversight of it, looking at risks, physical and transition risks, identifying them. We'll talk about scenario analysis, what it is and how that works, and what you need to do at a minimum. Carbon emissions, you already flagged that. Scope 1 and 2 is a minimum, but let's really briefly address Scope 3 because it's important to think about that. Then selected kind of unlimited metrics and targets you can report, and again, document everything. So if you do those things at a kind of minimum level, you'll have a credible and defensible S2 report. Hopefully as well, then, preserving a lot of time, cost, and capacity that you might not have at the moment. So this is really about finding that pathway. So first then, where we're going to start is with climate governance. So really who's overseeing climate-related risks and opportunity. Thierry, what have you seen working with, I guess, companies in Australia? Where are they generally at with this, and how difficult is it to get companies to get a head around what it is, and also to then actually, do it with them in a minimum viable way? Is this a big piece of work for a lot of companies, or is there a really good pathway to that minimum? What are the key things you need to do to be for year one in a good position?
Yeah, so it is hard because it's quite pervasive. It's touching all parts of the organizations. And you mentioned the 4 pillars, right? It's touching absolutely everything. So it is not straightforward. It's hard, particularly now for the Group 1 entities who have to report now, because there is no benchmark. They are the benchmark. Now, for Group 2 companies, the good news is that you will have a lot of examples. So the good news is that the Group 1 organizations are actually forging the path, and you will be able to see what does good look like. Now, you don't need to over-engineer it. And I think the minimum viable path is about defining what is the minimum defensible, auditable foundation that you need to have in place. It's not about doing the bare minimum either. It's about doing the right minimum, right? So the pieces that matter the most to be audit ready, right? And making sure that you are providing the right level of clarity to all the stakeholders that matter to you. So that's really what we are talking about here. And so governance, maybe to deep dive on this team, governance is one of these things where you already have a lot in place. So it's actually not too hard to update that. I'm thinking there are a lot of course, you have a board of directors, you already have an audit and risk committee. You don't need to create new committees, by the way. You just need to change the term of reference of these committees, making sure that climate and ASRS is part of a standing agenda that you are committing to discuss on a regular basis. Of course, you will have to document all of this, all of the output of this, so that it's defensible. You also need to make sure that you are clear about what are the operational meetings that are happening? So strategic planning, operational meeting where you discuss climate. So it's not about changing or adding new committees. It's about adapting the agenda to make sure it's fit for purpose for climate. So yeah, just a key consideration here.
Yeah, great. And I think that's the key here, that there's nothing new in the sense that you need to create any new structures or operations generally. It's about adding that layer of climate onto existing things. So you have a corporate risk register, is that capturing climate? How's the board, is it something the board talks about? Get it on the agenda, make sure it's in the minutes. Who's responsible at board level? Is there a climate champion is there a subcommittee that already exists where climate could be logically? Spell it out, do it, and then report it. So that's a key thing as well. Make sure you don't just kind of, as a sustainability person, make up the plan and then report it, but no one has actually implemented it. This is all about really implementing it and then making sure there's evidence that you've done this. So board minutes, meeting notes, all these things will show your auditor later that, yeah, you've done this. So this is really making sure that climate is across that governance level. People are thinking about it, talking about it, and taking action when required. So we jump to the next area then, identifying climate-related risks. So this is about, often companies already have a pretty good idea of corporate risks. So they have a risk register or an ERM system or something. There's someone thinking about this. It's making sure now that you do that for risk as well. But there are some requirements around doing that, making sure that you just don't, I guess, make up the risk, but you really follow the key areas here, and they kind of fall apart generally in physical risks and transition risks. Now around that then, that process of identifying climate risks, doing that in a minimum way, what have you seen, Thierry, in the market? Like, how do people go about that? Is it simply like what we just spoke about with governance, a matter of going to your risk person and saying, do some climate risk as well, make sure you do that? Or is there a bit more involved there? And what are the minimum requirements and how we do that? And who should be doing this in the first place?
Yeah, so there is no clarity around how to do it in an efficient way. I think it's being redefined at the moment based on what's happening in Europe, just to be clear. Now, there is a lot out there that you can leverage. Generative AI is also a fantastic tool that I suggest you leverage. You should do some desktop analysis, benchmarking, look at what your peers are disclosing around material risk and opportunities. Don't forget the opportunities, even though for year one, you may want to focus a bit more on the risk. There are also opportunities that you can unlock. And then it's about engaging with the team. So having some workshops is good practice to engage with your risk team, your finance team, your strategy team, to make sure that these risks are actually prioritized and understood. You need to understand what are your material risks and opportunities. You don't need to have 70. Actually, having a single digit list is actually probably better because they are more manageable. So having I think I was talking to an auditor the other day, 7 to 10, even under 10 would be good. But being clear about what are these risks for your business and having a narrative around it is going to be important. Also engaging about what are the key risk or opportunity indicators to monitor this risk on an ongoing basis and understand. And one thing that is mandatory as part of the regulation is the definition of short, medium, and long term. This is important. It has to be aligned with what the cycles of your business. So it's something that your organization needs to define. It's not something that the regulator is telling you what it is. So think about what is short term for you. Is that 3 years? Is that 5 years? Medium term? What is that 10 years? And why? And what is long term for your business? If you are in education versus if you're in transportation or healthcare, yes, it's short, medium, and long term will have different meaning for you. But it's important to consider this, 7 to 10 risks in the context of this short, medium, and long term.
Yeah, excellent. And so I totally agree. We see, it's not about quantity of risks. It's about the quality, like if you actually thought about what the actual risks are and then worked out which ones are material to your business. So you might find a potential risk, I guess. You say that could be something that eventuates, but at the moment it's not really material yet. I monitor that, but I have sub 10 real risks that I know are material to my business. And then also think about like what are physical risks? So where do you have assets that might actually face physical hazards? So think about bushfires. Are you in a flood zone with your office or your operation? So that's the physical side of things. The transition side then is if a new policy comes in around your carbon accounting or otherwise that might impact your carbon emissions that might be very high, that might be carry a cost. So think about physical and transition risk and go to both of them. And in doing that, as you flagged, Thierry, focus on risk, but don't forget the opportunities because that's important as well. There might be some real opportunities out there and try to capture them as well. Now, in that piece of identifying risks, another key component that often is kind of almost mentioned at the same time is climate risks and scenario analysis. Now, what are we talking about here? Resilience testing under multiple climate scenarios. So climate scenarios, what if the world heats by 1.5 degrees or by 3 degrees or even more? So there are different, really scientific scenarios out there that you can use, and you need to start thinking about what does it look like for my business if in the medium to long term that scenario eventuates. Is that going to create more of those physical risks for my assets or less potentially? What is the transition pathway through that particular scenario? Now, a lot of people get confused around scenario analysis in particular as well when we talk about a qualitative approach and a quantitative approach. What's the best way to simply explain that, Thierry? Like, how would you say, what's the approach we need to take, and what's the minimum there to do that in a simple, understandable way?
Yeah, I mean, we just come out of COP30 in Brazil, in Belém 10 years ago. We had the COP in Paris and setting up, the Paris Agreement scenarios. The scenarios we are talking about is what if we are living in a 1.5 degree world versus higher than that, and what does that mean for my organization and my risks, right? And so the Australian sustainability reporting standards are mandating two scenarios. One that is the 1.5 degree, which is what they call the orderly transition. Realistically, we are way over that. So we are already on a 2.6 degree trajectory, and so the regulator is asking you to do a scenario above 1.5 degree, which is a lot more realistic. So I suggest. I mentioned 2.6. There is a scenario at 3 to 4 degrees increase. I think that's the one. If you want to do the bare minimum, that's the one you should consider for your business. And then you need to understand the impact of temperature increase for your business over the short, medium, and long term. So that's what you need to think about. It doesn't have to be quantitative. You can start in a qualitative way, but you do need to consider that. You don't need to be anxious about it. You need to be pragmatic about it. That's really what the regulator is asking for. I think the concept of proportionality that Tim mentioned earlier is absolutely key for you, and something that means that you don't need to overcook it. You just need to think about it and mention it in your sustainability report and be pragmatic about what it means for your business.
I think that's the key here, that qualitative component. Use narrative, describe what's going on, your reasoning, how you see the impacts. We're not here looking at full financial modeling of everything or data modeling in another sense. It's really keeping it relatively simple, using logic, using narrative, using forward thinking, critical thinking to write a good scenario analysis up. Under this scenario, based on what my assets are, this is likely what's going to happen, how we see that in those short, medium, and long term, the same with the business as usual. So that's the focus here. Over time, you might get further into quantitative, where you do a lot more modeling and really kind of look into how that's, you get deeper into it. But for now, keep it simple, keep it narrative based.
Yeah, but just one thing in your narrative, though, you still need to understand the levers, understand how these scenarios will impact your revenue, your cost, your supply chain, your asset, and your capital plan. So yes, it's narrative-based, but you do need to understand the fundamentals of financials that will be impacted by this scenario.
Yeah.
Just wanted to flag that.
Yeah, exactly, and explain that clearly. Yeah. Then we get to greenhouse gas emissions. Minimum requirement, a full year of your Scope 1 and Scope 2, basically a baseline. First year, if you haven't done that before, that's what you need to report. So doing it minimally is just making sure that you get your electricity, your fuel invoices, and get that really kind of clear. Get help where you can't work that out. If you don't understand the spreadsheet, there's some really good platforms that can do that. Make sure you use standard emission factors and estimate where precision is not possible. So use estimations if you can't get accuracy there. But with it as well, this is a minimum. But to your point earlier, Thierry, why is it important that while you do this, you also start understanding what scope 3 is and start thinking and starting to work on that?
Yeah, so I mean, scope 1 and 2 is what is directly controllable by your business. So that's why we start with that, because you can control it and reduce it over time and commit with some target and KPIs and have some clear plans of actions. So that's the easy way. To Tim's points, please use a platform for this. Don't use Excel. That's not gonna. I don't think the auditors will be happy if you use Excel. Scope 3 is a hard part because these are supply chain related emissions, and so that's where usually you don't have clear visibility about these emissions. So you do need to do some assumptions around it. And it's not easy. So I suggest you start as soon as possible, even though you don't have to disclose it for year one. You do want to start the work now so that when you have to disclose it and it becomes auditable, you are ready and you have a good understanding around some of this Scope 3 data.
Yeah. And I think that's the key point. What you need to report in your report is Scope 1 and 2, but in terms of next years after that, get ready now and start that Scope 3 work. You're not reporting it in year one yet, but you need to be in a good position there because ultimately you'll have to. Then metrics, targets, transition narrative there. At least one climate related metric. We see often then kind of emissions data is being reported. What do companies generally at a kind of lower level, minimum level report in terms of metrics and targets? What have you seen in kind of at that level of reporting?
Well, so it's interesting because a lot of companies in the past have done some voluntary reporting. So they have put some reports out there around, with data around diversity, inclusion, around employee social, around how they impact the community, around safety. Now with ASRS, of course, the obvious one are the emissions one. I think that's what you need to absolutely report. So that's the key. Then, you know what, it's all about having a good story that is compliant or audit ready, aligned, that is clear for your key stakeholders. And so having a clear strategic narrative, strategic ambition, with some key strategic pillars, against each pillar having, and I would take E, S, and G as an example, having some clear set of KPIs that tell the story, a story that makes sense, that is aligned with what you are doing and anchored in data. This is what you need and should consider. Now, if you want to keep it easy, with a minimum viable path, you just have to report climate data, right? So whatever is in the S2 standard. So you can keep it narrow. Now, the question for you is, does that tell the story you want to tell? Is there anything else you want to tell to your stakeholders? And so if that's the case, you do want to add additional voluntary data into this. So yeah, it's an option, but climate first, climate data are mandatory, Scope 1 and 2 in year one, at least with transition plans and all the things we talked about earlier. And then it's up to you to decide what else you want to report. But if you do want to do the bare minimum, just focus on climate and S2. And
in that, like when we talk about targets there, like a few years back, everyone left, right, and center was saying all kind of carbon net zero commitments by certain years. Nothing like that is required, but you can provide some directional intent. What do you hope to do? What would your advice be around target setting? Is that something companies would be good to pick a year and have some idea what they're trying to achieve? Or is it better to just say we're doing the best we can and not make very kind of specific commitments?
My preference, I think if you have a clear understanding of the drivers of your business, you should be able to have some clear targets. If you are in this position and you understand also what are the things that may impact your plan and your targets, you should lead with this uncertainty. You should disclose it upfront to say, and you can see a lot of sustainability reports are including some a first page saying forward-looking statement, and these are the uncertainty that we are facing, but these are the assumptions we are making. And so all of the data we disclose, we are not sure about it, is directional, but that to the best of our knowledge, with the proportionality principles, this is what we think we can achieve. And no one will tell you off if you are able to explain that in a very simple way, right? So if you can, basically, in a nutshell, if you can just have some targets, if you can't, then you can have a good story.
Yeah, I think that's a key tip. Be really clear about what's uncertain, what's forward thinking. Yeah, and then finally, we flagged this a couple of times, but evidencing, documenting, there's a lot that auditors will look at and will require. So if you haven't gone through this before, then it's really important to really kind of use the rule of thumb. If it's not documented, it did not happen. Like, they need to know where did it come from, what is it, the information. What have you seen so far? Like, we know Group 1 still has to go through all this, so there's no direct, but maybe, some companies have done some, limit assurance maybe on TCFD, or otherwise, like, what would be the main things that you think could be real challenges for companies, or otherwise the areas that you say pay attention to, that's what companies might forget or not do up to scratch?
That's a good question, Tim. I think it's not complicated to have some good documentation, right? So you should. The hard thing probably is that over time, leadership and people change sometimes in organizations, and sometimes you lose track of where the information is and where the documentation is stored. So you should have clarity around where and what you stored. So probably having a master document that track all the information that can be used from a audit perspective. Now into the future, I think is going to be key. It's nothing hard. You just need to do it. Now, maybe the hard part is explaining the approach and methodologies you've been taking. So if you use some consultants, for example, you should keep track of all the documentation they provide, and including all the methodology and calculations. So yeah, that's the key.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I've seen with a lot of companies, they've done something on climate, and then often they know where the report is they got at the end, but all the work that's gone into getting to the report, they have no clue where that lives or who owns that, who's got that. That's the information we want. That's the information that's really important. So to your point, it's not rocket science here. Make a folder on a shared drive that's secure, where you can put everything climate related in that you're using. Any decisions you make, document them, put them in there, file them, minutes from the board, etc. Anything around the key pillars here, make sure it all lives in that folder. You do your report, and then the auditor says, so can I see all the information? It's all there. You don't have to go source it, or you lose it. So that's a really key component there. Now then, in terms of next step, taking actions, in particular for Group 2 that is looking at next year, one of the key things I really like that you flagged earlier, Thierry, is that Group 1 is doing this now. They're in the middle of preparing the reports. Those reports will be audited. So the reports ultimately that are in the public domain will be reports that are good, they pass assurance. So they're the examples for Group 2 and Group 3. So if you're in that kind of thinking, preparing now, there's some really good examples coming out soon. What are some of the other things that stand out to you that companies, they're getting ready for this now, Group 2, Group 3? What are the key things you think like, that's really what I would emphasize for them to think about and do?
I wouldn't go and do the bare minimum. I would do the right minimum, as I said earlier. And the right minimum for me is about making sure that everything you say in your sustainability report or climate report is right, anchored in data. You do want to tell a good story. I think one thing you should do is, don't publish just a dry report. Make sure all the stories are articulated in a way where, that makes sense to your stakeholders and it resonates. Storytelling is key. Design principles is key. Infographics, make it easy for people to read it and understand it. Not everyone is a climate expert, so the way you tell your story needs to resonate with people who may not be climate experts, and so it actually has to resonate with investors, with your employees. They should be proud of the work you are doing, and so my view is yes, comply, but maybe go a step beyond that and make it a nice report that you are proud of. Yeah.
I think that's a key point that I think a lot of people forget, especially if you're looking for a minimum viable path. That we just need to get this information on climate together, stick it in some report because that needs to be assured, and then that's done. But think about who's actually going to read that. There will be a lot of your stakeholders that are interested in your climate story. So you want to make sure that it is engaging. Of course, it's correct, it's accurate, but it's presented in an engaging way, and that they see that it actually in a way you care about it. Yes, it might be you're reporting the minimum required, maybe, or the right minimum required there, but you really make it accessible. You tell it in sense around your operation and how it matters to you as a business. So keep in mind that a lot of stakeholders will be able to see those climate disclosures and engage them on it. So with that, then
maybe before you close, Tim, one thing that also I recommend strongly you do is engage early with your auditor, because they will set the expectations with you, and if you engage early and regularly, you will be able to understand exactly what they are expecting at the end, and you will be able to adapt your process and how you do things so that at the end your report is audit ready. So just wanted to flag that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, and keep in mind as well that a lot of companies have to do this. So if you wait to the last minute to find an auditor, that might not be available. So I've heard that as well, where you need to plan ahead just to make sure that you do what's required and work with them on it, but also that you have an auditor. With that, there might be some questions. I'll ask Seth if he can return to the stage and see if there's any questions that have come up during the presentation, and see if either Thierry or myself can answer them.
Yeah, that was great, guys. A lot of really important information that you shared. If anybody in the audience does have any questions, feel free to either send them to me directly or write them into the chat icon. Let's give everybody a few seconds to submit them. Okay. All right, here's one I just got. This is for Thierry. What if any challenges have you seen companies face as they prepare for the AASB compliance?
Plenty of challenges. The speed. So I think Australian organizations have been waiting the last minute to get ready. So I've seen a lot of Group 1 scrambling to the finish line, or they are currently scrambling to the finish line. So my suggestion is, if you have a bit of time, if you're in Group 2, you should prepare as early as you can. I've seen challenges around the risk and opportunities, where to draw the line between what is material and not to your business. I've seen challenges around, hold on, there are a lot of things that are completely independent of my control. And how can I actually make plans and scenarios that can be understood by my stakeholders, although there is so much uncertainty and variability into these scenarios. And I think if you look at a lot of companies, I've looked at the sustainability report of Qantas, for example, who have a lot of dependency on sustainable aviation fuel, for example, and look at how they disclose upfront all of this uncertainty. These are some good examples that you should consider. A lot, we are not living in an easy world. There is a lot of variability that is out of control. And so, explain it in a way that it makes sense to your stakeholders. That's my takeaway. But there are a lot of challenges. I mean, scope 3 is another one, as I mentioned earlier. And also perhaps, where do I draw the line between what is mandatory and what is voluntary? What's the right story? How do I prevent greenwashing? All of these things are important.
Yeah, good answer. We just got another submission in the chat here. So this is from Andrea. Andrea's asking for a company that recently learned it would have an unexpected jump from group 1 to group 2, I guess because of an increase in revenue or another reason, and has not yet established the necessary processes, controls, and data because it was originally projected to remain in group 2. What would be the recommended immediate actions to take, and is there any relief consideration?
Behave like you are in group 1, and you need to be super conservative. Now, the good news is that the first year is going to be relatively gentle. So focus on what is mandatory. Get your scope 1 and 2 data, all of the things we talked about, all the things that are mandatory, just do it so that engage with your auditor, be extremely transparent and upfront about your situation, and get the things that you need to get done to have an audit-ready report. You can do. There is a lot that you can do relatively quickly, and actually all the examples we mentioned to do the bare minimum or the right minimum for group 2 companies are also valid for group 1 organizations. So if you just realize that you are in group 1, you should apply all of these principles.
I would add to that as well. I've seen companies where they're aware of they need to take this piece on, but it's not someone's responsibility yet. So really make sure that there's someone in the business who is the main, point person who's assigned this. It's their responsibility to get this across the line, and also that's really clear to management and the board that normal red tape should kind of fall away. This person needs to do some things rather quickly. So think about additional resources, external support, also financial resourcing. Like you need to now get this. Suddenly, your timeline is shifted by a year. You much quicker need to deliver. So your management and board need to give you the tools available and make really clear who's going to drive this, and get the support in where possible. You might be able yourself to work on your governance, but then you might need to get someone in who can do that climate risk and scenario analysis. You might need to get someone else in who can help you with carbon accounting, get that in a good spot. So really get going all of these issues that we've gone over, but make sure first and foremost that it's not sitting there at management level. We know we need to do this, but no one really knows who's going to do what. So get that clear.
Yeah, go to the board immediately. I mean, they need to discharge their duties. They are accountable for climate reporting. They need to make sure they have all the right work done. They will likely appoint, ask you as the exec to appoint a consultancy to support with the implementation, and approve some budget to do so. So I think that's the key to Tim's point.
Okay, great. All right, we got another question here from Grant. I have heard that the auditor does not need to be the same as the financial auditor for the company. Is that your understanding?
That's correct. I think except in superannuation and financial services. However, your auditor knows your business the best, and you do need, even though you have two options. You can do a separate disclosures, or you can do integrated reporting into your annual report. If you go separate, you're gonna have to connect all the disclosure from your sustainability and climate report to the financials. So having an auditor who understands already your financials is gonna make the process a lot easier for you. My suggestion is go with your current auditor if you think that's the right auditor for you.
Yeah, good point. I got another question to me directly. So the question was, are there any, Thierry, I think during the discussion you talked about how to reference Group 1 reports. Are there any Group 1 reports as an example that you want to share to the audience that you recommend that are kind of the right minimum style or that you believe are best in class that people can look at as a reference?
There are a couple that are coming out as we speak. I think Macquarie, ANZ Bank, Qantas is ASRS aligned as well. I will look at these large organizations as a starting point, look at what they are disclosing now for inspiration purposes. Look, I don't have a crystal ball around how good these reports are. I just know that they are tackling the right, what the regulation is asking for. And so to the best of your knowledge, these are the best reports so far. It's going to evolve over time. I'm sure we'll see a lot of reports appearing early next year around some of these early reporters and some of the learnings from that, but it's still very early days in the process. So yeah, Macquarie, NZ, Qantas, and a few other financial organizations are ahead of track, I believe.
Great. All right, so that concludes the Q&A. If anyone does have additional questions, we'll have our contact information up at the last slide. So as we wrap up here, so both Socialsuite and Climate and Decisions, Socialsuite being a technology provider, Climate Decision and Decisions as an advisory provider, together we offer a number of different services to help and support the AASB compliance work, everywhere from S2 pathways. We provide different AI tools to help with climate risk identification, assessments, scenario analysis, everywhere from carbon accounting, reporting, and guidance and support. So please reach out if you are looking to get started and you need a set of experts to help you on this path forward. And wrapping up, again, thank you for joining us today. My contact information along with Dr. Tim's are up here. And again, Thierry, thank you so much for joining us today. Your expertise on the subject matter was absolutely phenomenal. And we have Thierry's contact information up here as well. If anybody has any questions whatsoever, please feel free to reach out. And as mentioned in the beginning, we will be distributing a recording of this webinar to everyone that joined and registered in the next day or so. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day. And we'll talk soon and look out for the next webinar.
Thank you.